everybody. This is Trish Gray. I want to thank everybody for coming to our O'Reilly School of Technology webcast. We've had one already last month with our very own Matt Roberts, and if you made it to that, then you'll be able to see the video of that webcast on the archives page. So if you go to O'Reilly.com/webcast, you'll be able to find it there. Also, in a couple weeks, we'll be at OSCON. I will be at the OSCON News Desk on Thursday, July 28th. If you heard the 29th, it's actually the 28th, so Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll be having a little debate, Perl versus Python. Peter Scott versus Steve Holden. We're actually great friends, so it should be a lot of fun, so I hope you join us there. But today we're going to be talking about something that's really important to a lot of people, and that is jobs. I'm always getting questions from students and potential students saying, you know, what do I do? I need to get this job over here or this job over there, and how do I get there? What kind of courses do I need to take? Do I need certifications, exam-based certifications? Do I need a degree? What's going on? And rather than trying to answer all those myself, I thought, well, why don't I bring in an expert? So I have here O'Reilly Media's Cio Jonathan Reichenthal. For 20 years, he's been helping organizations across the world leverage the value of information communications technology to solve business problems, increase effectiveness, and support revenue growth opportunities. And since he's been with O'Reilly Media, he likes to say he's not growing the IT department, he is leading an IT transformation. And not only has he been featured in CIO Magazine, Information Week, and Computer World, but he's even been on CNBC. So we're especially thrilled that he's taken the time to help us today to figure out what kind of skills it takes to get through this tough technology job market. So without further ado, I give you Jonathan Reichenthal.
Well, thanks, Trish. What a lovely introduction. I appreciate that very much. I'm really delighted to be here. I've seen what you've been doing with the School of Technology, and I think the way you're pushing innovation is just terrific.
Thank you.
So we're gonna do a few things this morning. Let me just say a little bit more about myself. We'll get into the agenda here in a second. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of build a little bit on what you were sharing about what my team is doing here at O'Reilly Media. I like the way you kind of put it. We're not building an empire. What we're doing is really trying to lead a transformation and embrace the very best of IT. What I want us to be doing is pushing the envelope around innovation, looking at new ways of distributing content, of making, going above and beyond, as we've already been doing around publishing and conferences and webcasts, and being a leader and kind of showing what can be done and creating the opportunities for other companies to see what can be done with media distribution. So that's what we're doing. It's a journey. There's a lot of infrastructure work to be done first. You got to get the foundations right, and there's work to be done on that. Consistent with the presentation this morning, we also have to get the right talent in place and add to our very smart and talented existing team.
Now, that's easier said than done. Everyone's saying, well, there's so many applicants out there, but it's not just a matter of finding the best applicants. It's also putting the team together and having all the puzzle pieces fit.
There really is. As you'll see as we go through this, there's a number of new types of roles that are just emerging to meet that very point you're making.
Right.
It's a jigsaw. You've got to have some strong technical chops on your team, but there's a lot of need now for softer skills too, some management skills and some liaison skills, and I'll talk about that. I'm so excited about the attendees here. We've got people from all over the world. We've got people from Australia, Brazil. We've got folks on from India, Rwanda. We even have at least one person from Siberia. So this is truly global. I'll say up front, if I do talk about stuff in a U.S. context, I apologize. But really, a lot of what I'm talking about today is globally applicable. And as is a tradition, I always say hi to my dad, who joins my videos and conferences.
Hi, Jonathan's dad.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the macro environment in which we find ourselves, because that really is important to understand as you think about the what's driving the complexity in the marketplace. Take a look at the current job market itself. And I want to get into some of the sort of hot skills. If you're thinking about a career change or where you should be skilling yourselves to, we'll look at that. And then some tips and tricks, I guess, that are helping some people that I work with and some of my colleagues are telling me is working for getting people employed.
Like what to do and what not to do in the interview and things like that.
Yeah, so true. So why don't we do this? I'd love to know who's on today. So let's throw up our first poll, and we'll get people interacting with us today. So we want to know who you are. All right, so are you a person who is straight out of school, looking for your first IT job? Have you been in a job and are currently between jobs? Are you working in one of your first IT jobs? Are you entry level? Are you an experienced person and currently working in IT? And then, of course, there's others. So go ahead in there and click on your option and submit. We'll give you just here another 5 seconds.
Don't be shy.
Go ahead and vote. And
we found that our students tend to be about half already working in the IT profession and half trying to break into it. So we always think that that's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just trying to keep their skills current or progress in their jobs, but there's a lot of people out there that say, hey, this IT thing looks great. Is it something for me? So that's great to see.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, let's bring up the poll results, if we could. Thank you. And this should be coming up just a moment.
Aha.
Okay, so a very interesting spread, folks.
Okay. So it looks like we have the O'Reilly crew, because the O'Reilly tend to be a lot more experienced than the O'Reilly School of Technology students that come in. So this is about right. About 56% experience and already working in the IT field, 26% experience and looking for a job. So I'm glad you're here. And only a few percent seeking a first job or working in one of your first IT jobs. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see who you are.
Lovely. Well, that'll help me talk about the right things today. So let's go ahead and go back to the slide, if we could, the macro environment. Great. Lovely. Okay, I'm actually going to throw up two of my bullet points and talk about these. What are we seeing today in terms of the business and social changes? They're largely being driven by two phenomena, and this has been talked about a lot. The nature of globalization, a more flat world, and a world in which technology is playing a considerably larger role. In terms of globalization, I think we're all getting a good sense of what that is. Every country now has an opportunity to participate in the global marketplace. The entry barriers have dropped significantly, and you're seeing a lot of emerging economies on every continent. This is really one of the features of our time. If you kind of think about the first decade of the 21st century and now heading into the second, it really is that if you are a country that for most of its history was just insulated and unable to compete on a global stage, that is clearly changing. If you look at the top 10 emerging economies, 6 of them are in Africa. I mean, this is a terrific story, and the growth rates are very fast.
And you can see that in not just the economic climate, but the geopolitical climate. You're seeing it everywhere. The Arab Spring and the technology is really driving a lot of that and supporting a lot of that.
Yes. Yeah. Particularly if we look at mobile. I mean, mobile is the most pervasive technology. Numbers, in terms of people who use mobile phones versus those that have multiple phones, it's around the 5 billion person mark, right?
Wow.
A global population of about 7 billion. Think about that in context of computers. There's only, in terms of PCs and Macs, there's really only about sort of in the 2 billion ballpark. So there's almost 3 times the amount of cell phones. So that is a key enabling technology of our time and will continue to be. So you look at technology and you say, in terms of the macro environment, technology, if I think about my own sort of career, early on, sort of 20 years ago, it was about, let's use technology to bring about efficiency. Let's drive down costs, create efficiencies. And we've, remarkably, we've been very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Technology has driven us to what we're now calling hyper-efficiency,
mm-hmm.
right? So we're driving a lot of the cost out. And there is a net effect of this, which is the nature of labor changes, right? You don't need as many people doing, traditional work.
It's automated.
Yeah, a lot of automation has happened. And so these two characteristics, the fact that you have competition across the global marketplace and technology driving down the need for traditional jobs, is making it, those are two inputs in terms of the complexity that are worth understanding.
Okay.
So we look at something like the next driver, which is innovation. This is very near and dear to my heart. I've spent a decent part of my career thinking, talking, and executing upon IT innovation. It's really, what is innovation? It's about getting ideas and creating new value from those ideas. And if you think about the fact that it's a very competitive marketplace, which is what we talk about in globalization, that technology has become, in many areas, a commodity. The only thing left is to look for and create new value, is to look for new opportunities. And because of that, there is a significant momentum behind innovation. And you'll see it's when these organizations survey their CEOs
mm-hmm.
to say, what's your top 3 priorities leading, and this is small, medium, and large organizations. In the top 3, you'll always find innovation as a driving and a concern of leadership.
It's so important, and I'm seeing it a lot, especially in the IT field. I'm starting to see a new wave of innovation. It almost feels like the beginning of the 90s all over again, only now it's not about the web or the internet, it's about social apps mm-hmm. and making technology work for bringing people more together, and it's really exciting to see the next generation of that.
Yeah,
almost like a new technology boom coming.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've called it, or I refer to it as the golden age of IT. This is another golden age.
Yeah, it's I never thought I'd see it again, but here it is, and it's so fascinating.
Yeah, if you look at the combination of lots of data. Mm-hmm. I mean, a world with a data deluge, mm-hmm. this social layer that you're talking about that's riding on top of the internet, add mobile devices and location-based services into the mix. What I'm excited about is frankly, what does all that mean when you mash it together?
Exactly.
I mean, what is the net effect on society? And then, of course, what kind of opportunities will that present for people? Mm-hmm. If you think about those things I just described, each of those has a different set of skills that are needed. We have to think about the jobs differently. Right.
You brought up an interesting point. It seemed like back in the 90s and even in the 2000s, it was about the dissemination of information. Mm-hmm. But there's so much now that now it's about how do we organize it? How do we put it in our thought processes? And how does it tie us together? And how do we communicate using that? That's tough to do.
Yeah, I think we'll get to this a little bit, but it's worth touching on. You're referring to a lot of skills that are right-brained, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll talk about it now. I've studied and read the work of Daniel Pink, who really has pushed and got us thinking about this concept of the right-brained person. Right brain really saying that it's about thinking, it's about creativity, mm-hmm. it's about things that are very hard to quantify.
Yes.
And so his thesis is that the world belongs to the people who can focus on and learn very strong right brain skills versus left, which is going to be much more repeatable process, sort of manufacturing type activities.
Left brain seemed to be, before it seemed to be sufficient in getting an IT job, mm-hmm. and now you really have to put that together. You gotta make your brain hemispheres work together a little more.
Yeah, no question about that. Finally, we'll wrap up on the macro environment. We're being bombarded with mixed messaging about economics today, right? We even see interesting debates happening in the U.S. right now about our debt ceiling. You see a crisis in Greece and throughout Europe. You see very strong economic results coming from India and China. So economics plays a great deal into the equation here, and how the different opportunities will present themselves. The most remarkable thing to me, I think, about our economic situation is there are areas where we're doing very well, but it's not necessarily yet reflecting itself in significant demand for labor. Part of the problem is clearly we have more automation in place.
Yes.
Given hard economic times over the last few years, companies have looked for more automation. And so they're making more money. I mean, the balance sheets of big companies are very healthy right now, but we're not seeing that translate to jobs yet. The good news on this, the silver lining, is it really comes down to confidence, right?
Yes.
And as we see the economic problems that are right in our face right now start to dissipate and move behind us, where we've got every indication that we're going to see a pocketbook start to open up, and lots of big IT projects get kicked off.
I have to agree wholeheartedly. It seems as though the companies are just waiting, and they may even be already in the planning stages of the innovations that they can create. And they're just waiting for that feeling of, okay, let's go.
That's right.
So that's exciting. I already have a couple of questions
Sure.
for you. I don't know if if it's something that you're going to be talking about already, but we're looking at a question from Nicolay saying, what are the market options for young PhDs?
Okay.
We have a question from Kim saying, wanting some advice for engineers who have moved on to a management track with respect to how to stay competitive while there's less hands-on opportunity to work with latest technologies.
Okay. Well, let me quickly touch on both of those. Great questions. The first one is, again, very personal, because I also have a PhD, and I was faced with this question myself. There's various reasons why people engage in study. There's self-development. There's just a practical need to go and get skills for your current job or the job you're seeking or would like to seek. A PhD is an interesting actual desire. If you look at incomes relative to degrees, you get a considerable income boost when you go from no degree to a degree.
Right, a bachelor's degree.
Right, with a bachelor's degree. When you go from a bachelor's degree to a master's, you also get a nice big, this is just statistics in terms of people who get masters, get another amount of money that is reflective of their credential. But what's funny is when you get to PhD, the increment is not as big.
Yes, that's absolutely true. I've seen that.
It's not necessarily something you do for an income boost. You've got to do it because you love study, you love research.
Right.
But the other thing I want to say is historically PhDs have gone the academic route. And what we've seen just in the last sort of 10, 15 years is there's absolutely a place for PhDs in mainstream industry.
Yes, and that's good to hear because, coming from the University of Illinois like we did, we have a top 5 computer science department, but the PhD track is definitely on the research track for computer science. And you're right, there aren't that many jobs out there for PhDs in computer science because it's such a practically applied discipline that it almost seems like companies are a little reticent to hire the PhDs because they might be overqualified. So they tend to look at them for more management track positions. But it's getting the climate is changing for that. We're already seeing a professional science master's in Northwestern. Berkeley's looking at professional science master's, and I'm sure that'll start bleeding into the PhD tracks as well.
Yes.
I'm not sure that answers Nicolay's question, the market options.
Yeah, we kind of touched on a few areas. I would say that there is a growing amount of R&D departments in big organizations, R&D playing directly into the need to address innovation.
Right.
So I think there are clearly opportunities there.
With the new boom coming, there's going to need to be a lot of research and development there.
Yes.
So then also management tracks if you can get the business side of things, right?
I think so, yeah, I think so. And it's going to depend. The question, obviously, the person who asked the question didn't refer to what area the PhD is in.
Yeah, Nicolay, could you tell us what you have a PhD in? So maybe, yeah, I know that Scott he was on the PhD track for mathematics and physics, and that does help because, anytime that you go the research route like that, you're going to get a good solid foundation of how to research, how to develop things, and not just in the necessary narrow discipline that you're in, I think, in my opinion.
So what we'll do is, rather than answering the second question, I'm going to try to capture that later on in the presentation.
Okay, great.
If we could go ahead and I want to bring up another poll before we go into the IT job market. This is poll number 2. I'd love to know what you feel in terms of your optimism for the next 3 years. So the question is, how do you feel about the prospects for IT employment growth in the next 3 years? Do you believe there will be more opportunities, less, or fewer opportunities? Perhaps you're not sure, and then you may not have an opinion on it. So go ahead. I want to kind of get the general. Now we have a global audience. It will be very good for us to gather that data to understand the level of optimism or pessimism there is in the marketplace currently.
And while we're waiting for those results, I have a question from Hans, particularly looking for information on niches where telework, geographically independent work is particularly available, especially where English fluency is valued. So another international question.
Yeah. I think there is growing acceptance about telecommuting, the ability to work from anywhere to do your work. I think technology has enabled that greatly. That we've pushed down the cost of video conferencing now. Mm-hmm. You see Skype embedded in Facebook now.
Yeah, O'Reilly School of Technology, we fully embrace telecommuting. As you can see, we're practically empty here at the Sebastopol offices. Most of our team is spread out across the country. And as long as we were able to get some good communication going, which we found with Skype, we tried several different avenues, mm-hmm. but it works really well. So I wouldn't say that there are necessarily niches, but companies. You want to research the companies themselves that you're working at, so that any type of company might be sticklers on everybody being at the headquarters, or they might be completely casual about people telecommuting. So you really just got to look at that mm-hmm. On a case-by-case basis.
I think it's fair to say that the opportunities to do that are growing.
Yes, I agree with that too. Let's see, do we have more questions? Oh gosh, we have so many questions. This is great, guys. Thank you so much. Advice for engineers who, that's one you're going to address later. Mm-hmm. What skill to master or certificate to attain will you suggest to a beginner in the IT field where the work can be done remotely? Also, what are the specific possible work jobs with these skill certificates? And that's something that you're going to be addressing later on, I believe.
Okay, you can. Well, you go. We
have questions about development languages. We have, just lots of specific questions here. So we'll get to all of them, I promise.
Yep. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and share the results of the poll, because we're all excited to see that. Let's see how people feel about the marketplace. So if you would go ahead, please. And
great.
That is good. Actually, that's surprising.
56% optimism. There will be more opportunities. 26% saying I just don't know. Mm-hmm. And 15% pretty pessimistic.
That's very interesting. Well, that's very pleasing to see, of course.
Yeah.
And
I'd say I'm part of the optimistic crowd.
Good.
Yeah, for sure.
I think there's every reason to be. Mm-hmm. So that, I guess...
you may see, if you go to our O'Reilly School website, I have a whole job market snapshot for IT for 2011, and it's extremely optimistic. And I know that doesn't seem to mesh with all the doom-gloom news coming out, but IT, it's different. It's growing.
Mm-hmm. Good. So if we could, please, let's go back to the deck. And coming up right now. There we go. Thank you very much. Clearly this is a U.S. Data point, but it reflects, I guess, a little bit of that optimism in that there's no doubt if we look at the U.S., the unemployment situation is nowhere near where we would like it to be. But folks that are competing in the IT marketplace have a much better chance. The unemployment is considerably lower at the 4.5 percentile. My guess is that's not necessarily the numbers you'd find in every country, but the ratio of general unemployment to IT unemployment, I would guess, would be fairly similar. So it does indicate that whilst there are big areas of the economy and economies that are suffering greatly, particularly in the lower skilled professions, the unemployment is higher. IT tends to be a very high skilled job, and it's becoming more high skilled as it gets more complex. And so we see the numbers. It's obviously clearly in demand, and those that are qualified have a much better opportunity to get those jobs.
Right, and it's interesting. We're finding that even with all the schools that are already out there for IT, it seems like there hasn't been enough education, enough production of skilled workers to meet those. You know, I'm talking to Peter Scott all the time, and he's saying there aren't enough Perl workers. You know, get trained in Perl because there are tons of Perl jobs out there. So it's an interesting phenomenon to see.
It is. You've got to one of the things in listening to this presentation that I think about is you got to understand numbers, and you got to understand data. We'll talk about that in a moment. And you see a number that you go to countries and you see very high percentage of unemployment, and you can clearly step back and be concerned about that. You got to understand that. Let's drill into it a little bit. Let's understand what the numbers are really telling us.
Exactly.
And looking for patterns in data is a core skill.
It is.
And as technologists, we're really in the data space. We've got to understand what the data is telling us.
We all have to become data miners to make it work for us.
So the market really is, the things we've talked about. We've talked about that big companies have a lot of cash on their books. We've talked about the fact that there is increasing demand for people who have good credentials and higher level skills. Why we're not seeing the big projects kick off and the recruitment and the scale we'd like to see has a lot to do with market confidence. And it goes back to the point I made near the beginning of the presentation, which is that as the market gets more confident, we anticipate considerable hiring. The good news is, a lot of people ask me, should I go into IT? Is it a good profession? Well, I'm going to be biased. Right? I'm going to say it's a terrific profession, and I firmly believe that.
I think you're preaching to the choir.
And why? First of all, if you like problem solving, you like difficult things, and you like change, it's a great profession. But it's also a profession where because the world is increasingly technology driven, you're going to have a role. The world is going to need smart people innovating and building new things. And that's why I have a lot of excitement about the outlook.
Yeah, we're already in a world where your refrigerator has a computer in it. So eventually everything is going to have a technology aspect to it.
The other outlook that's relevant in the IT job market is, and again, I think I'll use your point, which is preaching to the choir, a technology skill that was relevant 3 years ago even today becomes less relevant, and you already need to be thinking about the next skill that's needed in the next, and the observing the trends and understanding what would be the underlying skills to support those trends.
Right.
There's a lot of new skills that are emerging. Everything, or all the skills, all the complementary skills that we need for deploying this huge migration to cloud architecture.
Right.
All the underlying skills to support this colossal mobile infrastructure that we're building and as getting more complex.
Absolutely.
Those skills weren't needed 10 years ago, or they were different, right? So you see continual demand and reinvention required from individuals to go after the jobs that are out there.
I'm always telling people to diversify their portfolio because there's the emerging trends for all the new innovations coming out. But then there are the jobs out there that we've seen that support all of that still have the basis in Java and enterprise software. I feel like that's always going to be there somehow, and it's going to kind of evolve. But I'm always telling people, get both in there. Get some emerging technologies in there, and get a good basis in some of these technologies that have enormous amounts of jobs out there, even though they may not be the sexiest thing out there.
Yeah, so true. Why don't we take a question, perhaps, before I go to the next slide?
Okay, so let's go back to these ones that are on here. Development languages, which are most important to learn to keep abreast of the market: PHP, Cold Fusion, .NET. I just want to preface that by reiterating that if there's any way you possibly can diversify your portfolio, then that's great. But also, if you go to my job technology snapshot, we did do some data mining that we got from the Radar folks, talking about the jobs that are out there and what technologies and how many training materials are out there in comparison to that. And what we found that the less training materials there are for a certain technology compared to the number of jobs out there, the better prospect it seems for job seekers who learn that technology, because there's obviously a dearth in skilled workers in that area. So we found that Java is a huge one, which you wouldn't think, because Java's been around forever and ever and ever, and you'd think it would be saturated, but it's not. Whereas right now, jQuery and Ajax are a very hot language, and it's emerging as a big job maker, but it's also kind of saturated in terms of people going out there because it's so hot. So you kind of have to look at that, and you also have to look at your own geographic area, because there tends to be clusters of certain technologies. As you know, in Seattle is a Microsoft town, but then there's a lot of offshoots that come off of that from people that used to work at Microsoft. So the technologies kind of tend to be similar. So that's my take on it.
No, I couldn't answer it better than you.
Okay. Well, hopefully that answered your question, Nancy. And we have one from Scott Dumbeck saying, graduating CS student with core Java skills but not sure what else to study: Python, Perl, C, C#, web technologies, iPhone, Android.
Well, I kind of go back to your point, which is having a nice mix and diversifying is really valuable. Any one of these things that Scott refers to has value in the marketplace. There's certainly in the space of mobile, I'm encouraging people to at least understand and perhaps get into mobile app development. There's an enormous amount of migrations that have to happen. Within organizations, they've got to make the shift to make their existing ERP apps and other applications available to mobile platforms. And then there's the new innovation, all the new stuff that both consumers and that workers need to use. So mobile technologies that run on mobile, including HTML5, which you can apply to multiple platforms, I think is increasingly valuable.
I'm interested to find out exactly what technologies are being used right now for mobile platforms. You've got Objective-C working on the iPhone platform, but then there's also Android. But what does that mean when people are saying Android, Android, Android? What do people program in to make Android apps?
Yeah. Well, I think I get this question asked, from peers too, and there's no general consensus on what you develop for mobile, given the fact that you could focus on an iPhone app itself, put all your energies in that. And lots of companies are doing that. Or you can build an HTML5 which will run against all the platforms.
Okay. So HTML5 seems to be the common thread between them all.
Well, that's where sort of leaders in the market are generally thinking. And so I would say the debate on this continues, and it's a rigorous debate. You have to remember there's hot innovation and I should say competition between what Microsoft's doing on the mobile platform, what Google's doing with Android, what Apple's doing. That, if you like, that battle itself has to play out. And we need to understand who will be the major players in the years ahead. So
you think that this is all going to shake itself out, sort of the VHS versus beta kind of war, and something's going to come out on top, and that's going to be what everyone uses. So you have to be careful. If you go crazy with one of the really hot technologies and then that goes away, then you don't know. I mean, we thought that maybe Python was just going to be a fly-by-night technology, but now, Google's using it, you're using it. So that's a good thing to learn, but I see what you're saying,
I always think the marketplace is a terrific determinant of the future. So there's no question that will help us.
Okay. We have a question from Yuri. He says, what is your forecast on service-related folks? Network admins, firewall guys, not necessarily programming the latest buzz social media ones.
Yeah, I'll quickly answer this, and then we'll jump into some of the skills. We can be definitely focused on the next shiny thing, and we will think, everybody has moved to the cloud, right? Most of the world has big, complicated data centers with lots of servers that need administration, very complicated networks where we need great network engineers. So it's easy to forget that, right, and to focus on, based on the general zeitgeist, if you like, of modern tech, that the skill you have is immediately going away. We have a global infrastructure that needs support for the next decade or more. That's not going away. If you're a really good certified or experienced network engineer, there's great work and will continue to be great work out there.
Absolutely. I tend to agree with that, especially now that we're going to software as a service and cloud technologies, because people are going to be depending on, cloud service providers and data centers a lot more, and that's going to create a lot of need for tech support. When you don't have control over it, then you're depending on the tech support guy, right? And in terms of what you said about old technologies, there's still an industry, the insurance industry still uses COBOL, for crying out loud. So, there are lots of things that are not going away in that case. I hope that answered your question, Yuri. So we go on to what skills we need.
Yeah, let's do that, and we'll come back to, we've got some really good questions here.
Great questions. Hang in there, guys. We're going to get to them.
So, hot and emerging skills, and I want to say from the outset, as you look at this list, it's not exhaustive, okay? So if I've missed out one that you believe strongly is a hot skill, it's probably true. I've just taken a quick slice here at some that I'm seeing that are really interesting, and we're going to see some considerable demand for them. Everything around data literacy, there's no question about it. This is the era of big data,
not just how to gather data, but also how to make it work for you.
Yeah. I love the saying, I would say, we're looking for meaning makers, right?
Yes.
And what we mean by meaning makers is, so we're a world of sensors. We're gathering all this information, right, through our shopping habits, through our behaviors, through our mobile. And it's gathered in multiple forms. And it's telling us stuff that isn't necessarily overt, and it's going to take people and tools, right, a combination of both, to make sense of that.
What does it all mean?
What does it mean?
Like the double rainbow guy.
Yeah. And then those that can be meaning makers get into that data, interpret it, look for patterns, and then present it up to folks that make decisions. And let's say it's a decision that can, increase revenue considerably or change the course of an industry. That's kind of a rock star moment for a person who can do that, right?
Yeah.
So we at Riley in particular, this is one of our strong messages, is that the big data movement, the understanding of data, is something that needs to be understood and is an opportunity for employment, considerable employment.
And it's getting to the point where there's so much data out there that no business decisions should be made without a thorough and accurate interpretation of the data that you get beforehand. I know that we depend, I don't know if Josh Nutzman is on the webcast with us today, but we depend on him at O'Reilly School all the time to figure out what it is our student needs. He wrote the database administration series, and he's all about data mining, so you should tap into his brain sometime.
Very nice. I wanted to kind of just throw out a data point that would be useful here. McKinsey is saying just in the next short years, here in the U.S. alone, we're likely to create in the region of about 1.5 million data literacy roles.
Wow.
Brand new employment opportunities. So that's a significant number as a proportion of the overall IT job market.
That makes me want to take the DB.
So the next few are around what I call kind of coordination roles. And this I'm hoping this answers some of the questions you're seeing around deep technical skills versus softer skills. What I see a lot is there's no question that you need smart people training out code and building networks and configuring systems, and that's valuable, important work we have to continue to do. We also need people who can sit beside and really empathize with business people and what they actually need. Right? I've often talked about and wrote about this kind of divide that's existed for a long time. You've got IT on one side of the wall and the business on the other, and those shall never meet.
I've always considered myself a translator of the two. I don't know how many times I said, okay, I'll translate that to the business people or vice versa. So that's so important.
People that do that well are very successful. And as myself, my colleagues look at sort of what we need, and we also look at what other companies are looking for. It's increasing amounts of these both good communication people that can translate, as you refer to, and can coordinate efforts. What we see increasingly is that IT organizations seldom act alone anymore in delivering. Right? You've got often a outsourced vendor, you have a local vendor potentially, and you have other people within an organization who interact, who have to deliver. There's no way today to deliver up it's very difficult, I should say, to deliver up a solution without having all those participants at play. So this broad notion of coordination is increasingly important. And it does have the title of project manager, but there are other coordination type roles that are very valuable.
Yeah, and I've noticed a trend in a lot of people on the business side taking our courses to learn the technical side more, not because they want to do any programming or anything, but because they want to be able to speak to the IT people. And that's a good skill to have as well.
So the next couple may, also I'm looking at some of the questions there, may address those. This is a good time for software engineers. There's really no question. I don't have the percentage, but I know it's got to be there's got to be more demand today than there is supply of software engineers, particularly in certain skills. So today, very, very good career, high demand, and I would suggest that it's going to be increasingly in demand in the years ahead, given this technology-driven business environment and social environment that we now find ourselves.
That's a good segue into Dave's question, which is how much specialization is too much? For instance, mobile is a broad market. One cannot be an expert in networks, app dev, UX, and data, right? And you're absolutely right. I actually want to jump into that and say that we know people who are experts in their field, and if that's what you're best at, we have a friend, Ben Banger, who created a Pylon framework for Python, and he is known as an expert in his field, and that guy will have job security for the rest of his life. But he also makes it a passion of his to get involved in the community and also to do the coordinating efforts of all things Python. So it's not just about programming Python all the time, every day. It's about how that works together with everything else. So when you're specializing, you got to think about, are you specializing in front-end software? And if that's the case, then you need to have a conglomerate of HTML, HTML5, jQuery, JavaScript, AJAX. There's a lot of technologies within that little bubble of specialization and that sort of thing. Or, if you're someone like me who is more of a communications person, then I do have some software areas that I'm good at, but I also understand the data side of things, and I also understand the business side of things. So it's just, find the point you want to be and then figure out what the radius is around that and what you need to know within that sphere.
That's a good answer, very nice answer. My personal, I'm liking, JavaScript a lot still. Ruby, we see that as quite easy, as a nice answer to a lot of...
And these are all open source technologies. Yeah. Michael wants to know any information on open source versus commercial software experience.
I wonder if he's referring to software and software programming specifically, or just generally?
I would assume we're getting a lot of, proprietary software versus open source software, and it's funny because even Sun Microsystems, Java is considered an open source technology even though it's proprietary. So basically, do you learn LAMP technologies, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, or do you learn Microsoft technologies, .NET, or anything like that?
Yeah. Some of that is certainly a personal choice.
Right.
Based on your love for a particular platform and the style in which you write that code. If I think about one sort of, this might not be what Michael is specifically asking, but there has been a transition, particularly around content management systems, from them being niche to being mainstream. And I'm thinking, specifically around products like WordPress, Drupal, those types of platforms. They've really come of age, and you see enterprises at all sizes embrace them, and subsequently we're seeing some very nice market demand for WordPress developers, and Drupals and beyond. I think there's another side to this, and it was the previous question, I believe, which is clearly, you've got to have a good experience. I believe that, and I think it's validated through the research, that at the end of the day, you've got to have good optimized solutions, right? You've got to have good written software, but they're going to fall down if you don't have a great user interface. If you don't have simplicity, clarity, make it too busy or make it confusing, you'll lose people. You look at something like the mobile app market, and people are fickle. You download a 99-cent app, and you don't have a good experience, you're never going back to that again.
We learned a lot of that with our webcast that we had with Matt, because he's an expert with that, and how many people were frustrated just because of one little thing in CodeRunner, and once that was fixed, it was gone. So absolutely, I agree with that. Obviously, I prefer open source technologies, Michael, but then I'm in the Bay Area, where open source technology is huge, whereas in Seattle that may not be the case. So to jump into that and say that we know people who are experts in their field, and if that's what you're best at, we have a friend, Ben Banger, who created a Pylons framework for Python, and he is known as an expert in his field, and that guy will have job security for the rest of his life. But he also makes it a passion of his to get involved in the community and also to do the coordinating efforts of all things Python. So it's not just about programming Python all the time, every day. It's about how that works together with everything else. When you're specializing, you got to think about, are you specializing in front-end software? And if that's the case, then you need to have a conglomerate of HTML, HTML5, jQuery, JavaScript, Ajax. There's a lot of technologies within that little bubble of specialization and that sort of thing. Or, if you're someone like me who is more of a communications person, then I do have some software areas that I'm good at, but I also understand the data side of things, and I also understand the business side of things. So it's just, find the point you want to be, and then figure out what the radius is around that and what you need to know within that sphere.
That's a good answer, very nice answer. My personal, I'm liking, JavaScript a lot still. Ruby, we see that as quite easy, as a nice answer to a lot of...
And these are all open source technologies. Michael wants to know any information on open source versus commercial software experience.
I wonder if he's referring to software and software programming specifically, or just generally?
I would assume we're getting a lot of, proprietary software versus open source software, and it's funny because even Sun Microsystems, Java is considered an open source technology even though it's proprietary. So basically, do you learn LAMP technologies, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, or do you learn Microsoft technologies, .NET, or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, some of that is certainly a personal choice.
Right.
Based on your love for a particular platform and the style in which you write that code. If I think about one sort of, this might not be what Michael is specifically asking, but there has been a transition, particularly around content management systems, from them being niche to being mainstream. And I'm thinking, specifically around products like WordPress, Drupal, those types of platforms. They've really come of age, and you see enterprises at all sizes embrace them, and subsequently we're seeing some very nice market demand for WordPress developers, and Drupals and beyond. I think there's another side to this, and it was the previous question, I believe, which is clearly, you've got to have a good experience. I believe that, and I think it's validated through the research, that at the end of the day, you've got to have good optimized solutions, right? You've got to have good written software, but they're going to fall down if you don't have a great user interface. If you don't have simplicity, clarity, make it too busy or make it confusing, you'll lose people. You look at something like the mobile app market, and people are fickle. You download a 99-cent app, and you don't have a good experience, you're never going back to that again.
We learned a lot of that with our webcast that we had with Matt, because he's an expert with that, and how many people were frustrated just because of one little thing in CodeRunner, and once that was fixed, it was gone. So absolutely, I agree with that. I mean, obviously, I prefer open source technologies, Michael, but then I'm in the Bay Area, where open source technology is huge, whereas in Seattle that may not be the case. So that is a question of preference, geographic availability of jobs, and also of what you plan to do overall, and what technologies work best for that, I think is what you were trying to say, right?
Yeah.
We have a question, what about Core C and C++? Is it worth pursuing in the area? Core C and C++?
Yeah, I'm not going to necessarily weigh in too heavily on specific languages. I know I kind of threw out a few that I'm seeing and I like myself. I think we could actually take some of these questions, redirect them to people who are deeply passionate about C and where it plays. Yeah. So I'd rather not necessarily weigh in on that one.
Right. I'd like to say, if you learn if you learn the concepts behind them, the data structures and the object-oriented aspects of C++, and that's going to help you in a lot of other technologies, Python and Java and more. So it couldn't hurt.
So let's go. Let's finish off some of the hot emerging skills, and then we'll take some more questions. We talked about cloud. I call it cloud talent, because I could have created a whole slide of skills that were related to cloud, and so let's address this head on. There's no question that cloud can represent somewhat of a marketing term. The technologies that have existed, many of them have been around for a while.
We're based on a cloud system before it was ever called.
Sure, you're a great example of that. But it can be valuable to have a unifying kind of theme to a new set of technologies, and so cloud does represent. Yeah, it is a nice buzzword. It's useful to us. But there clearly are new pieces to it. There are new considerations. Many organizations, and I'm looking at some startups, that are going with lean architectures. They're almost entirely cloud-based and software as a service-based. They have no data center, no file server, no email infrastructure. And so that is fundamentally different, running that. And that's why I think in kind of situations where it is that kind of lean architecture, the needs are then shift towards things like APIs and data management. It really becomes a data problem more than a software application question.
Yes. APIs, learning APIs. The ability to learn APIs is huge, because no API is the same.
Yes.
But understanding how it works in this kind of society will help you in the new cloud era.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
So finally, two other areas that I think are pretty hot right now, skills around architecture, and you know, I wanted to go back to a point I made, just so not to trivialize it. Even if you think of lean architecture, which in its optimized state is all cloud-based software as a service, there's going to be things like payroll and human resources and things where you've got to think that through, and the way all the applications are going to talk to each other, and you can have a single source of truth. Even in that scenario, you have to have good architecture skills. It only gets more sophisticated, more complex when you have you are working within a company or join a company where there's 20 years of IT legacy.
Yes.
And so an architect can help take that legacy from that old world into the new world, can support the implementation of new systems, everything from lightweight technologies to heavy ERP systems.
Right.
And so it's become much more disciplined. There's now some great groups and frameworks that support architecture for the first time.
Great.
They've matured to a point where it is a recognized profession, a very well rewarded and recognized profession. So I encourage people to look at that. And finally, I think for just in terms of skills, it goes without saying that security not only has been important, is important, but will be important. Right?
Even more and more and more as time goes on.
Yeah. The threats. I mean, the bad guys are getting smarter too.
Yes, they are, and you almost have to think like a bad guy in order to be the good guy. That's why we've been putting together a security series, an advanced Linux security series, and it's tough to do because you have to think like a hacker. In order to think like a hacker, you have to hack, and we have to keep that safe and secure while you're learning that. So that's a really interesting challenge that we've had.
So we're coming up on our 5 minutes, so
yes,
we've had so much fun.
I hope you all can stick with us. It's going to go a little over, but we have so many great questions. We want to get to all of them. It might be a good time to ask, how is data visualization seen as a specialization? How is it perceived by geeks and clients or potential clients?
Oh, I love this. I love this one. I'm so glad that Joseph brought this up. It goes back to data literacy. There's no fluff on this. A profession and gaining a set of skills in data visualization is highly valuable, and I'm very supportive of that. Yes.
And if you understand the business concepts behind the visualization that you're trying to do, that's very important so that you can best interpret it. Okay, I'm unclear on exactly what is meant by cloud talent and big data. Michael Ritchie asks.
Sure. Well, it's a good question, and we could probably have a webcast just on that question. Right? So broadly, it was a bit of a cop-out on my part. Cloud talent, what I was trying to refer to were a whole set of skills related to cloud, so let me kind of list a few. One would be cloud implementation, right? So people that understand who the vendors are and how to actually build the cloud solutions. Do you work with some of the common vendors? Do you look to build out your own private cloud? Then there's things.
Is it kind of like a glorified ISP of sorts? Is it like you're dealing with servers and then accounts upon those servers, and so someone with a networking background would be good at this?
I think I think that would be a good career transition for a network person.
Okay.
I think it's a very clear path.
Right.
So in many ways, you're right. There are certain technological changes and nuances that one would have to learn to be able to move into that role.
Okay.
But if you are a network engineer who wants to be a cloud engineer, that is a very good career path.
Okay.
So other cloud talent would be cloud architect, actually designing the environment and accommodating for the growth that you might.
And that involves database design skills.
It could.
So, for instance, relational theory would be a good thing to learn.
Sure.
You know, that sort of thing. That would be PHP SQL too.
Things like modeling would be valuable. Being able to draw up the schematics that support the architecture, having those diagramming skills are valuable.
Okay.
Finally, big data, because I want to get to Michael's second point. Big data is just, again, it's sort of a brand or a marketing term for this notion that we are creating an enormous amount of new data every single day. It's been driven largely by the fact that we're collecting that data because of our behaviors. And so what happens when an organization like Walmart, which has a significant supply chain, records through RFID every point at which a product moves through its supply chain, and you multiply that by millions of products every single day. If you capture all that information and it's being dumped into a database, there's uses for it, and then there's discoverable uses, right? Which are what we talked about earlier, which is finding meaning in that data.
So almost learning how to write the perfect query. You know, this perfect query that is going to give you exactly the data that we want to see. That's a skill. That's tough.
Yes.
Okay. Now we have a question, advice for experienced software engineers in Silicon Valley who have retrained themselves in new or hot technologies, but companies won't hire because they don't have experience in the new technologies. How do you get experience in emerging technologies? That's a good question.
Yeah, so this
the old catch-22. I can't get experience until I get a job, but I can't get a job until I get the experience. But there are other avenues. I would suggest open source groups, you know, projects, open source projects. I would suggest internships, you know, doing some consulting on the side.
And I think Michelle is also saying, though, that she might be ahead of the game. She's saying that there could be people with technologies that companies haven't caught up with yet.
Right.
That's an interesting side of the coin as well, right? So, you know, congratulations, I guess, for being ahead of the curve. What will happen is companies will catch up with you. And so you're probably going to have to be kind of open, have your cast your net wider in terms of organizations that are hiring for those niche, that niche soon to become mainstream technologies.
And you know, you have a great opportunity to self-promote. You know, if you are very skilled in an emerging technology, put yourself out there as a preeminent leader. You know, get a blog about it. You know, get a Twitter account and start tweeting about it. And the more passionate people see you, the more job opportunities you're going to have in that emerging technology as they come about.
Good. So,
what skills are needed to be a system architecture expert? Architecture from Renee. What skills are needed to be systems architects?
So, a couple of ways to think about this. There's lots of IT skills that help in becoming a systems architecture, so there's no one answer to it. Specifically, you're asking about a systems architecture role, so I think any sort of system administration role would be a good starting point. Network engineering would be very valuable. I think having some experience with software development, I think that goes without say almost across the board, understanding code and how it's organized.
In terms of what we teach, I would point you toward the Linux Unix series and the database administration series. Putting those two together, I think, will get you on the right road.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is answered. And so Nicolay says, what do you think about basic skills of learning algorithms, math, much better than actual languages? You know, I have an opinion on that. You know, anytime you have the underlying algorithmic concepts down, the object-oriented concepts down, then you're going to be that much faster at learning practical languages. You're just going to be able to pick them up like nothing. So I definitely highly recommend having that math basis, having that algorithmic basis before you do any of the practical languages and technologies, because then you'll be able to speak to all of them, I think.
Good. Yeah, I like that.
We have a question. How about jobs at team leader manager level?
So the question is from Andrew. How about jobs? Well, all these people that we've been talking about require a person to drive solutions and to motivate and to coordinate again activities. I think there will continue to be an important role for an IT manager, and IT leaders in general have a very key responsibility in helping and enabling their staff to be successful. It's a good question. I think there's more behind the question, but I would say that to be a great IT manager is hard, and companies want great IT managers. And so I would focus, if I'm an aspiring or existing IT manager, on things like terrific communication skills, soft skills, presentation skills, some of that coordination.
The translation we were talking about between business objectives and technical goals, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
The trend definitely that we're seeing is that the role of the IT leader is trending more towards overlap in the business. So at the highest level, the CIO level, that person is now increasingly part of running a business in the broader sense, particularly in the most enlightened businesses. And then down from that, the IT leader manager will gain respect as they can talk specifically in the language of that business and not in technical terms.
I found that as an IT manager, I have one foot definitely in the technology side of things, but one foot definitely in operations and the business side of things. And so you have to be able to straddle that line. Okay, Eric, one more question here. Any thoughts on the differentiation in outlook between tech-savvy communications and content development jobs? So he's saying, front-end versus IT back-end programming jobs for the web. I'm in a job now that does both and torn on what skills to focus on developing further. That's a very good question. Front-end versus back-end. Does he concentrate on more of the putting your head down and working on enterprise software solutions, or going to the front side of things and providing lightweight architecture schemes for web apps and things like that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think for Eric it's about, well, number one, what does he want, right? What does he love doing? Yeah. So he has a say in it. I think the second thing is what's most valuable to the business that he works in, if he's going to remain with that company. It's hard to answer the question beyond that.
Specific,
both areas clearly have value. I know from the folks that we work here at O'Reilly with, and in the past working with other companies, that if you have a real passion for user interface and design, you probably want to really focus on that. Because that's where your passion lies. If you like the plumbing, the instrument, the mechanics, and you are able to separate the two, sometimes I think is what Eric's alluding to, it's kind of an overlap.
Yeah.
You might want to focus on that. So there is a personal choice involved.
And if you're truly torn between both, Eric, you might see which has the stronger pain point within your company. In which area are you solving the most problems for people, and in which area are there other people already doing things in that case? Because then you'll slide into a more stable role, I believe. Hopefully that answers your question. We have even more questions. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to keep answering questions?
Yeah, why don't I wrap up this last slide, and then we'll just finish on some questions.
Okay.
Because I'm confident that people want some tips. And I'll just kind of glaze over them here. What I think we both offer to our listeners today is an ongoing conversation.
Yes.
So there's stuff we won't get to today. We're very accessible via Twitter.
Twitter at Reichenthal, Reichenthal.
Very nice.
Correct. Or at O'Reilly School, of course. We're there for you. We have a Facebook profile, O'Reilly School. We have a LinkedIn profile, so you can find us anywhere, but we'll keep going.
As I look at these tips that I was going to discuss, I'm pretty pleased that we've covered a lot of them in our little chat today. I think that you've got to build a personal brand. If you're at the beginning of your career, this is something you've got to begin to think about. How do you want to be perceived, and what do you want to do, and what kind of brand should support that? And then as you think about yourself as an experienced hire, and you're either trying to reinvent yourself or get ahead to the next opportunity and don't have a well-defined brand, I think you need to think about that. And it takes many forms. Clearly, social media has played a big part in this, but the ability to have eminence, which is doing presentations and making yourself very visible in the marketplace.
Self-promotion is key. Self-marketing. You have to market yourself in the right way.
In the right way in that, making sure it's positioned that's meaningful, that it's valuable to the consumer of that. So when you think about your overall brand, some of the characteristics are, I've got to say that if you're in technology and you want to get ahead and you're looking to grow and follow a path, don't lose sight of your personal passion, and make sure that in the interview and with your colleagues that passion is very visible. Because, as I wake up every day and come to work, my love for technology and passion for it is a great driver in my own personal brand and what I like to do.
It keeps you coming.
It really does. The credentials clearly are something that you need to think about what makes most sense for you and your opportunity. I think it's fair to say that your resume is going to stand out and be competitive where you have a certificate, one or more, where you have a degree in your field, some levels of study. I have a personal preference, and it's just me, to encourage my colleagues and friends, if they don't already have a degree or they don't have a degree in the work they're in, to think about that strongly. At the end of the day, and I know there's lots of debate about the degrees and their value right now. There's no question today that a degree opens doors, right? Where without a degree it doesn't. Same goes for masters, and then ultimately a PhD will open a lot of doors for you. But when you get into that meeting that door led you into, and you sit down, it's you, and it's you open your mouth and you demonstrate what you can do. The degree helps you, and it will help with skills, but it will be you. It helps you get that door open, but it will be you in that meeting that really sells yourself.
How much importance do you put in portfolios? When you interview someone, do you ask them to see samples of their work?
I think it depends largely on the role. For example, if we're hiring for a business analyst, or as I've done in the past and currently, I like to see documentation. I want to see how they present documentation. Some of the other interview ways that we achieve satisfaction that the individual knows their stuff is to have a technical interview. So if you are applying for a programming position, we will ask the questions that are specific to that, to really understand whether you, how would you solve a particular problem, how would you approach it technically.
Yes.
If you are applying for an online producer position, we absolutely want to see your portfolio of websites and user interfaces that you've developed and things that are unique to you. So it's a mix. I think generally it's very useful to be able to cite and demonstrate real examples of what you've done.
Okay. Do you have any pet peeves? That's what I want to know. Do you have anything that just makes you want to, oh gosh, get out of my office right now?
Well,
or rip up the resume immediately.
What's most important to me, and I guess I should talk personally, but I'll say what generally CIOs and recruiters, IT recruiters, are looking for. I'm not so concerned about the presentation of the resume as long as the person is really qualified for the job, right? So that qualifications, credentials are most important.
Sometimes it's hard to see exactly how qualified they are because of the way the resume is written. I could do a whole webcast just on the resume.
There's no I think I know where you're going. If there's a list of 100 skills and it's not clear whether you're good or bad at, are you a beginner? That's one thing. And if there is a coffee mug stain on the resume or printed on pink paper, those are distractions that you probably don't want to have. I think that a person, there's some basics, right? You've got to be on time. It's a cliche, but you've got to be on time or just before. And you got to be presentable and sit up and be articulate and engaged in the interview. Those folks who are very casual, they haven't made an effort, perhaps are a little late, that might not ultimately disqualify you, but it doesn't help you.
Right. So just the little things matter.
Yeah.
And doing your research on the company that you're interviewing for, that sort of thing. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, should we go to questions? I have more questions. Okay, so Nancy asks, what opportunities are there for people with healthcare experience to break into health IT? That's a big one coming about.
There are a lot of opportunities in health IT. I, in fact, had identified some of the hot industries, of which health and medical in general is going to be quite lucrative. And so I would encourage people to explore that area. Other areas are computer gaming. Continues to grow and be very successful for people. Energy-related work. Medical device manufacturing is a very a growing industry sector. So my conclusion is there'll be lots of IT jobs. Nanotechnology.
Yes.
We're seeing that really take off.
Bioinformatics.
Huge. An area that I explored myself at one point, but didn't ultimately pursue, but really loved it.
That's a lot of big data issues that you're dealing with.
And then the last one in terms of interesting sectors is the environment, everything to do with not just climate change, the green tech, and the way in which we can cohabitate in a more sustainable way with our environment through existing technologies and technologies that are emerging. Okay,
and now we have a question from, from Brian. From Kim, I'm sorry. Advice for engineers who moved on to a management track with respect to how to stay competitive while there's less hands-on opportunity. Did we already ask this one? You said you were going to get to that, and I believe we answered it in terms of the management track and staying competitive, having one foot in the technology side and having the other foot in the management side.
It's hard. It is hard. As much as I've wanted to as an individual, and some of my peers have wanted to remain hands-on. The work often doesn't allow that to happen.
And especially if you want to progress in your career.
It's tough. Yeah, it is tough. There was a point in my career where I could write some code.
Yes.
And I regret that I don't do that today.
So much. Sometimes I lament, I'm always doing paperwork and business things, and I can't do more software like I'd like to.
That's right.
I wish I had a better answer for you, Kim.
I do have one suggestion for Kim. Which is to look at IT governance as an area not just of high value, but also where you can get certified. And if you look at COVID as a certification, I think that could be very useful to you. The ability to align technology with business need in the broader sense is highly desirable.
Okay, we have a question from Andrew. At the end of my career in design management, looking for that one last contract to enable creatives. Do opportunities exist? Design management, enable creatives. I believe he means web design, user interface, and of course opportunities exist in that. I mean, you would think that with all the websites out there that it's all been done in terms of design, but things are changing fast. And if you understand how to design for a new world, I just look at some of the design. I have some friends, young friends in their 20s in the Mission District, wearing their hipster clothes, and they're all designers for the web. And the way they design websites is way different than the way they were designed before. So if you just keep pushing that cutting edge and see how user interfaces evolve, then I think there's always going to be the opportunities.
I like that a lot. I would just add to what you said. I'd look at something like the iPad. The iPad is such a different form factor that it causes us to rethink design.
It's a new paradigm.
It's a new paradigm, and I'd say if Andrew's looking for one last, or you know, where he should go at the end part of his career here, that would be really cool to push.
And learn HTML5 and learn jQuery. Okay, Joy, I hope I said this correctly, Joie. What skills and master or certificate will you suggest for a beginner where the work can be done remotely? You know, I got to tell you, if you're a complete beginner, what we're always telling people, what Georgia is always telling people when they call is start with HTML. Because that's the first thing that's going to introduce you to any sort of web or internet or anything, whether that be, you know, or if you want to go into network engineering or, you know, the back-end sort of thing, then start with Linux Unix 1. Start learning how to navigate through a simple operating system and that sort of thing, and see where it takes you, because, you know, we found that HTML will take people in a myriad directions, and same with Linux Unix 1. That's why we have the uber beginner courses, so that you can kind of test the waters. Learn object-oriented programming. Introduction to object-oriented programming is a big one. You're just learning the concepts behind it. You're not learning a language particularly. See what you like. And then there are tons of opportunities starting from there. It's a good starting point.
I agree. No, I agree.
Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. This has been such a great hour, and I appreciate you all hanging out for 20 minutes later. It's been wonderful. One more time, our Twitter accounts, Reichenthal, Reichenthal, or O'Reilly School, OreillYSchool. Come and visit our Facebook page, our LinkedIn profile, our website. Give us a call sometime. George's number is on our website. So other than that, we will see you at our next O'Reilly School webcast, which will be coming from the news desk at OSCON, like I said, on Thursday the 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And I want to thank Jonathan so much for taking the time to come out here and imparting your wisdom with us. I feel like I've learned a bunch. I hope you have too. And we will be posting the video for this in the next few days. And I'm going to try to get Jonathan to do a follow-up blog, see if he has any concluding thoughts with it. So if you have any more questions, then be sure and let us know this so that he can address those. Okay?
Thank you very much, Trish. This is a real delight. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.